My true story, from Louisiana. They plotted to burn me alive in the SUV after secretly buying a $5 million 0-cents life insurance policy in my name. They thought I'd die quietly. I lived loudly. And legally. That SUV is just like her, looks polished but reeks of decay. Just a shell. Disgusting. I cannot even sit in the same room with her. Why is she still here? She smells like mothballs and death. As long as she's breathing, I have to pretend to care. I am so tired of it. She needs to die already so we can collect the insurance. I stood behind the bedroom door, holding the cup of tea they had asked me to bring. My hands trembled, but not from the weight of the porcelain. It was the words, so sharp, so deliberate, they pierced through me, cleaner than any knife could. The tea rippled in the cup, and for a moment I thought it would spill, but I just stood there, frozen, listening. That house, that very room, was mine once. I had picked out the wallpaper, chosen the curtains with lace edges, bought the dining table that still sat in the kitchen. My late husband and I had built our life in that house from scratch. Every inch bore the fingerprints of love, struggle, and frugal patience. And yet now, after he was gone, I had become a tolerated ghost in my own home. They did not know I was standing there. They never looked back to check if the woman they talked about was within earshot. To them, I was a fixture, an old sofa they could not yet throw away. I gripped the teacup tighter and stepped away, careful not to make a sound. When I reached my room, I locked the door for the first time in years. After my husband passed away, I lasted 4 months alone. The house felt too quiet, too hollow. I had thought the silence would be peaceful, but it was heavy. Every room reminded me of him, of us, of the way we used to laugh at the news while folding laundry or dance slowly in the kitchen after dinner, even into our 60s. My son Robert had offered, at least back then it sounded like an offer, for me to move in with him and his wife Alicia. "It'll be easier for you, Ma," he said. "No more driving, no more cooking, no more bills." It had sounded reasonable, even kind. He asked me to transfer the deed to the house just to avoid future complications. He was my son, my only child. I trusted him. So I signed. They moved in a week later. At first, things were polite. Not warm, not exactly welcoming, but polite. Alicia called me Mom, like it tasted sour in her mouth, and Robert was always too busy to look me in the eyes. I chalked it up to adjustment. Grief makes people odd, and I was still waking up every morning expecting my husband's voice. But it did not take long before I saw the cracks. They started by rearranging the house, putting all my things in boxes and labeling them storage. My late husband's recliner disappeared without a word. The piano I played every Sunday morning ended up in the garage. "Too bulky," Alicia said. I was moved to the guest room at the back of the house, the one with no window view and a draft that crawled up my legs at night. I said nothing. I tried to stay out of their way, to be helpful, to not bother. Then came the subtle isolations. Alicia cooked meals, but I always found my plate already covered in plastic wrap on the table, separate from theirs. They ate in the dining room, I ate in the kitchen. My coffee mug disappeared one day. When I asked about it, Alicia said, "It was old and chipped. I threw it out. You can use the disposable ones." The bathroom down the hall, once shared, was suddenly labeled Robert and Alicia only in bold red letters. I was to use the half bath in the laundry room, the one with the creaky door and broken sink stopper. My towels were moved out. So were my toiletries. Even the dog, a golden retriever named Benny, who used to sleep at my feet, began to avoid me. Alicia did not like dog hair, so Benny was not allowed in my room anymore. Still, I tried. I bought groceries, I ironed Robert's shirts, I watered the plants. When Alicia had a cold, I brought her tea. She did not drink it. And now this. The words I overheard were not a slip of frustration. They were plans. Not just impatience or weariness, but eagerness. A desire for me to die. For money. Insurance? What insurance? My heart beat so hard in my chest I could hear it. I sat on the edge of my bed, that lukewarm cup of tea still in my hand, and stared at the wall. It had faded just slightly from sunlight over the years. I remembered painting it with my husband, laughing when we accidentally used the wrong shade. Now that wall was the only thing still familiar in this house. Everything else had changed. I was not safe here. I was not wanted. I was not loved, but I was awake now, and I was not ready to die. 2 days after I overheard them plotting, Robert came home with a surprise. "Got you something, Ma," he said, flashing a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. "Come outside." Alicia stood behind him with her arms folded, a forced smile pressed against her face like lipstick on a crack. I followed them out to the driveway. There it was, a dark gray SUV, shiny, clean, big. "For you," Robert said, dangling a key fob in front of me, "so you can get around more easily. Grocery store, church, whatever you like. No more depending on us." I blinked. It was strange. Just last week, Alicia complained I was too old to be trusted behind a wheel. Now suddenly I was being handed keys to a brand new vehicle? I reached for the keys with cautious fingers, and Robert dropped them in my hand with a triumphant little nod. "It's all yours, Ma. We even added you to the insurance policy, made it official." Official. That word echoed like a stone down a well. Alicia stepped forward and opened the driver's side door for me as if I were a guest at some dealership event. We had it detailed and everything. "Smells like new, right?" It did. The leather smelled untouched. The dashboard still had that protective film. The back seat had a plush new blanket folded neatly in the corner. I should have asked questions. I should have wondered why, after months of cold shoulders and cruel comments, they were suddenly acting like the children I remembered. But I did not. Instead, I smiled. I told myself maybe they felt guilty. Maybe Robert realized what he said. Maybe Alicia had a change of heart. Maybe, just maybe, the idea of losing me had shaken something loose in their souls. They started doing other things, too. Robert offered to drive me to my doctor's appointment. Alicia came back from the pharmacy with new pills, saying the doctor had prescribed a mild sleep aid to help me rest better. I had never seen the prescription pad. I never met that doctor, but they said it was all taken care of. They were just trying to help me rest more. They invited me to go for walks, at the park no less. Alicia packed a blanket and snacks. Robert helped me into the SUV like a chauffeur. We sat by the water. I told them stories. I do not know why I started telling them things I had buried for decades. Maybe because I wanted it to be real. Maybe because I missed being seen. I talked about the little classroom I used to teach in, back when I was just Miss Geneva from the parish schoolhouse. I told them about the Christmas we gave each student mittens, and how I had to stay late to sew patches into mine so the kids would not see the holes. Robert stared at the lake. I told them about the time he brought home his first ribbon from the state spelling bee, how I had taken a photo of him with a disposable camera and framed it for our hallway. That frame, I noticed, was no longer on the wall. Alicia nodded politely, chewing her snack. Robert said nothing. He did not even blink. It was like he was waiting for me to stop talking. Later that night, I opened the new bottle of sleeping pills. The label had my name on it, but the pharmacy name looked odd. I had never heard of it. It was out of town, in some small place I had never visited. The pills were light blue, unfamiliar. I stared at them in my palm and felt the chill creep up my spine again. This was not kindness. This was choreography. A perfect little dance to lull me into stillness. The SUV was not a gift, it was a stage. A set piece for a story they were writing without my consent. The story of an old woman, tired, confused, drifting off behind the wheel and dying tragically in a fiery accident. Except I was not confused, and I was not tired. Not anymore. The house was dark, and the air felt thick. I had woken up with a dry throat, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. It was one of those humid Louisiana nights when even the walls seemed to sweat. I slipped on my slippers, careful not to make noise, and made my way toward the kitchen. The hallway creaked under my steps, soft as whispers, but something else caught my ear. Voices. I stopped. It was Robert and Alicia. Their bedroom door was cracked open just slightly, the sliver of light casting a thin, sharp line across the floor. "Are you stupid?" Robert hissed. "If the car explodes, it has to look like an accident. No evidence, no questions. You want to go to jail over this? Then check the damn device again," Alicia snapped back. "I do not want to end up in prison for $5 million. That thing better go off right when she's on the bridge. No delays, no malfunctions." My breath caught. My hand instinctively went to my chest, pressing against the trembling that had suddenly taken hold. "She is barely functioning anyway," Alicia continued, her voice growing louder. "That SUV is just like her. Looks polished but reeks of decay, just a shell. Disgusting. I cannot even sit in the same room with her. Let's get this over with, Robert. I want to be in Hawaii before winter. Silence, then a sigh. Robert, calmer now, muttered, "We'll time it. The bridge is 2 miles from the gas station. We make sure the ignition timer activates halfway across. That's it. Boom. Burnt frame. Case closed." I stood there, frozen, the cup I had meant to fill still in my hand. My legs felt like wax, barely holding me up. I backed away slowly, praying the floorboards would not betray me. When I got back to my room, I locked the door and collapsed against it. They were planning to kill me. Not metaphorically, not passively, not by neglect or cruelty. They had planned it. They had talked about the logistics, the timing, the method. Alicia had called me a shell, disgusting, something to be discarded. I stared into the darkness of my room, my hands shaking. My heart beat so loudly it seemed to echo through the mattress, through the floor, like a warning drum. For a long time I sat there in silence, just breathing, just trying to stay conscious. All the pieces clicked: the SUV, the sudden kindness, the sleep aids, the restful drives to the edge of town, the way Alicia watched me buckle my seatbelt, like she was memorizing every detail for the police report, the whole show, the production, the performance they had staged with me as the unknowing star. Except now, I knew. And it broke something inside me, not in the way people talk about heartbreak or betrayal. It was quieter, colder. I did not feel grief, I did not feel rage, I felt removed, as if my soul had stepped slightly outside my body, just enough to see things clearly. What I saw was not a son. What I saw was not a family. What I saw were masks, hollow-eyed creatures wrapped in borrowed affection, smiling while measuring the distance to the cliff's edge. They had called me a shell, but they were the ones who were empty. I looked around my room, the floral lamp I had bought at a yard sale 30 years ago, the quilt I had sewn myself, thread by thread, during nights when I could not sleep after my husband died. The photo of Robert as a child, still tucked in the edge of my mirror, his smile wide and innocent and forever unreachable now. Was I mourning? No. Mourning belongs to love, and there was no love left here. Only strategy. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. My ears still echoed with Alicia's voice. Just a shell. They had no idea I had heard them, and that was the one thing that kept me alive that night. Not fear, not despair, but the knowledge that I had time. Not much, but enough. They left every Sunday morning around 9:30 to go to the farmer's market. Alicia liked to make a show of it. Floppy sun hat, oversized sunglasses, wicker basket hanging from her elbow like she was in some southern magazine spread. Robert followed behind with an empty cooler, always checking his phone like he had somewhere more important to be. It gave me exactly 45 minutes of quiet in the house. 45 minutes of stillness, without their eyes watching me like surveillance cameras hidden behind politeness. That Sunday, I did not sit on the porch or water the plants like I usually did. I waited exactly 3 minutes after I heard the garage door close and the SUV pull out of the driveway. Then I moved. I went straight to their bedroom. My heart pounded in my ears, but my hands were steady. I opened drawers, methodically, not rummaging, just looking, listening, knowing. I was not even sure what I was searching for until I found it. A brown accordion folder. It was wedged between stacks of old magazines in the bottom drawer of Alicia's vanity, hidden behind a tangle of scarves no one wore. The folder was heavy, thick with papers. I brought it to my room and locked the door behind me. I sat on the bed, folder in my lap, as if it might explode. Then I opened it. What I saw made my vision tunnel. At the top of the first page was my name, Geneva Marie Collier, my birth date, my social security number, my current address, a policy number, a policy amount, $5 million. The words life insurance, primary insured, stared back at me like a dare. I turned to the second page. Robert's name was listed as the sole beneficiary. Alicia's was listed as the emergency contact and care proxy. My hand gripped the paper so tightly it crinkled, but what stopped my breath, what truly stole the air from my lungs, was the signature line at the bottom, Geneva M. Collier, in cursive, curved, elegant. but not mine. It looked close, enough to pass a glance, but I knew every loop and every flourish of my handwriting. I had spent years grading papers, signing report cards, filling out checks and forms and permission slips. That was not my signature. It was a forgery. Not a poor one either. Someone had practiced, traced, studied, maybe even used old documents of mine to get it right. I stared at it for a long time. They had planned everything. They had chosen the company, some out-of-state firm I had never heard of, probably for less scrutiny. They had fabricated paperwork. They had forged my consent. They had declared me insured for $5 million. And they had timed my death. I flipped through the rest of the folder with surgical precision. Inside were emails between Alicia and an insurance agent. She referred to me as our aging dependent. She asked questions about accidental death clauses and whether a fire caused by vehicle malfunction would be eligible for payout. She even requested expedited processing because I was in declining health. I saw one note from Robert to the agent. Please keep all correspondence confidential. She is elderly and doesn't handle stress well. I nearly laughed. That is how he described me, a liability in a bathrobe. I found a receipt for a device purchased online, a custom ignition relay timer, wired to trigger combustion through an app. The delivery address was our home. The name on the invoice was Alicia's. In the back of the folder was a final document, a typed letter of intent, drafted but not signed, written in first person, supposedly from me. It stated that I had requested Alicia to handle my estate and that I had gratefully accepted the gift of a new vehicle to encourage my independence. The gall, the precision. They had built a coffin out of paper and signed my name across the lid. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the stack of evidence in my hands. I thought about the Sunday pot roasts I used to make, the Christmas stockings I handmade for Robert, the time I gave Alicia my late mother's brooch because she said she had nothing nice to wear to church. All lies. All that kindness, returned with legal murder. I was not crying. Tears belonged to heartbreak. This was something colder, something steelier. This was war. I slipped the folder back into its place, careful to leave every scarf as I had found it. I closed the drawer slowly, listening to the soft click as it shut. Then I walked back to my room and sat on the bed again. I looked at the mirror. I saw my own eyes, tired, yes, but no longer foggy. I had seen their plan. Now they would see mine. I took out my old address book. The pages were brittle, the ink fading, but one number stood out like it had been waiting for this day. Evelyn Thomas, attorney at law, retired, but not idle. She had been my best friend in high school. We had lost touch, as people do, but we exchanged Christmas cards every year, and I had kept her number tucked between pages like a pressed flower. I dialed. She picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn speaking," I breathed. "Evie. It's Geneva." A pause. "Jenny? Jenny, my God, it's been... Are you okay?" I looked down at the folder, still warm in my hands. "No," I said, "but I think I'm ready to be." And for the first time in a long time, I felt the faint outline of something rise inside me. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. And that would do. Evelyn Thomas arrived 3 days later. She drove herself in a dusty blue sedan, wore oversized sunglasses, and stepped out of the car like she was walking into a courtroom. Her silver-gray hair was tied back tight, and her blazer was crisp despite the Louisiana heat. She looked every bit the woman I remembered, sharp, poised, with that same no-nonsense energy that used to make the boys at school go silent. I opened the door, and for a second we just stared at each other. "It's been a while," I said softly. "Too long," she replied, stepping in and hugging me so hard I thought my ribs might shift. She smelled like peppermint and old books. We didn't waste time on tea or cookies. Evelyn set her bag on my kitchen table, pulled out a slim black folder, a small digital recorder, and a yellow legal pad. "All right," she said, clicking her pen. "Tell me everything. Slowly. No detail is too small. And don't hold back, Ginny. I need the whole truth." I sat down, hands clasped tightly in my lap. I told her everything, from the moment Robert invited me to move in, to the subtle cruelties, to the SUV gift. to the overheard conversation about the ignition timer. I described the forged signature, the $5 million 0-cents life insurance policy, Alicia's emails about vehicle malfunction, and the letter of intent I never wrote. Evelyn listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally or scribbling furiously. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said, "These two idiots think they're smarter than the law. That's their first mistake." I almost smiled. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. "We're going to do this right, Geneva. No confrontations, no accusations. Not yet. We build, we gather, we time it." She handed me a tiny recording device. "You'll keep this on you whenever you're in the house. They'll slip up again, they always do. Get them on tape, clear, unambiguous words. I'll handle the rest." We spent the afternoon scanning documents. She photographed every page of the insurance folder. She used a magnifying glass to compare my real signature on old checks and letters to the forged one. "Not even close," she muttered. "Their arrogance will be our evidence." That evening we went to look at the SUV. Evelyn was careful, gloved, precise. She opened the hood, checked under the dash, peeked into the trunk. She took pictures of the wiring near the ignition. "This isn't standard," she said, pointing to a device with unfamiliar wiring. "This is a retrofit. Probably off-market, controlled remotely, cheap but deadly." I felt my stomach twist. She saw it in my face. "We won't let them get away with it, Jenny, not on my watch." Back inside, she pulled out a checklist. "Here's what we need: audio recordings of intent, more digital traces, emails, text messages, app purchases, anything. And one controlled witness, someone unrelated who can testify to their treatment of you. Think neighbors, caretakers, mailman, anyone who's seen or heard something." I nodded slowly, my mind already scanning through faces and names. Evelyn packed up as the sun dipped below the cypress trees. Before she left, she turned and looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen in years, not just as a lawyer, but as the friend who once stayed up all night with me after my father died, braiding my hair and telling me I'd survive anything. "You're not alone in this," she said. "And you're not crazy. What they're doing? It's premeditated, attempted murder. And we're going to bury them with their own paperwork." I stood at the door after she left, holding the recorder in my palm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like proof. I started pretending 2 days before I left. I shuffled slower than usual, let conversations trail off mid-sentence. Once I left the kettle boiling until it screamed like a siren. When Alicia came storming in, I stared at the steam like I did not understand what it was. She looked me over with that glint of cruel satisfaction. "She's finally slipping," she muttered under her breath. "Good." I dropped a fork at dinner and stared at it like it belonged to someone else. I repeated the same story about my old classroom twice in one day. I laughed at the wrong moment when Robert made a joke. They started whispering again. This time, they were not angry whispers. They were confident, triumphant. They believed the end was near. They thought I was dissolving, week by week, into the harmless old woman they needed me to be. That was my gift to them, my final performance. At 4:07 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I slipped out the front door. I wore the same shoes I had worn to my husband's funeral. I packed no bags. I took no keepsakes. Just my ID, a manila envelope of documents, and the small digital recorder Evelyn had given me. I left one thing behind: a single envelope on the kitchen counter, addressed in my handwriting. Inside was a note. "Your mother didn't die in an accident. She walked away." I walked 3 blocks before calling the car service Evelyn had arranged. The driver did not speak much. He was kind. Did not ask why an old woman was climbing into the back seat with eyes that looked like winter. He dropped me off at a safe house Evelyn had secured near Baton Rouge. Quiet, nondescript, 1 bedroom with thick curtains and a pantry full of canned food. She had already arrived, pacing the living room, her blazer off but her eyes still sharp as ever. "You made it," she said. "I always do," I replied. Within an hour, she had filed the formal complaint. She called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, not just the police. The ATF had jurisdiction over vehicle explosives and tampering devices. She submitted everything: the photographs, the forged signature analysis, the insurance documents, the email prints, and, most damning of all, the audio recordings. The recordings were clear, crystal, Alicia's voice, laughing. "That SUV is just like her, shiny on the outside, rotten underneath." Robert, whispering back, "Timer set. Once she hits the bridge, it's done." The case was flagged as priority. Within 48 hours, a federal investigative unit was assigned. 2 agents showed up at the house under the guise of a vehicle recall investigation. Alicia let them into the garage with a smile, still wearing her designer robe. Robert hovered behind her, half interested, half distracted. They had no idea they were being watched, recorded, documented. The agents examined the SUV. One took photos, the other opened the dashboard panel and removed a strange device connected to the ignition wires. They said it was part of a routine diagnostic, and left within the hour. That night, the lab confirmed the worst. The device was a combustion relay. It was wired to activate through a custom app, one available only on Android platforms with sideload access. They tracked the source. The app had been downloaded to a Samsung phone registered under Alicia's maiden name. The activation logs matched the planned date of our family road trip. It had been scheduled to go off precisely 9 minutes after ignition, coinciding exactly with the time it would take to reach the steel bridge over the bayou. Had I driven that morning as they expected, I would have died in flames over a body of water too remote for witnesses and too deep for questions. They had planned it with surgical detail, but they had not planned for me to wake up. They had not planned for Evelyn. When the agents arrived at their home again, this time with a warrant, Alicia cried, not out of guilt, out of disbelief. Robert tried to talk, claimed it was a project, a joke, a prank gone wrong, but the emails, the forged documents, the insurance policy all said otherwise. They were arrested at dawn, the same hour I had left them. Poetic in a way. The neighbors watched from their porches. No one spoke to them. No one intervened. By the time the story hit the news cycle, the media had their headlines ready. Elderly woman escapes fiery plot by son and daughter-in-law, $5.00 M, policy at center of murder attempt. I did not speak to reporters. I did not answer calls. I stayed in that little safe house and watched the light change through the curtains. Evelyn brought me tea every morning. She read the articles aloud, her voice dry with satisfaction. "They're trying to paint it as a misunderstanding," she said, "but the evidence is airtight." I nodded. I was not angry, not anymore. Anger requires energy, requires belief in repair. I only felt clarity. I was not crazy. I had been right. And soon, everyone would know it. 2 months passed. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, tampering with a vehicle for the purpose of harm, and unlawful possession of a destructive device. The arrest made local news within hours. By evening, it had gone national. Louisiana couple charged in murder plot against elderly mother, $5.00, insurance policy uncovered. There were photos of the SUV, charred wires dangling from the steering column like nerves, a blurred image of my face from an old church directory, a mugshot of Robert, my son, still in his button-down, looking somewhere between furious and afraid. Alicia's booking photo showed her with smeared mascara and eyes that no longer gleamed with victory. The prosecution moved swiftly. The evidence Evelyn had built was airtight. Documents, recordings, digital forensics, the device itself, and their own voices tying the noose around their plans. There was no room for denial, just delay. But eventually the trial date arrived. I attended. I wore black, not in mourning, but in truth. Black was the color of clarity, the color of absence, the color of what they had tried to reduce me to. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, back straight, face unreadable. They did not look at me when they were brought in. Alicia kept her eyes down. Robert, I watched him scan the benches, searching for someone who might offer him comfort. He did not find it. He was thinner, paler, as if the very guilt had carved through him. But I did not feel pity. I did not feel anything except a sharp, humming stillness. The trial lasted 5 days. The prosecution laid out everything. They showed the jury the policy, the forged signature, the email threads. They played the recordings in full, Alicia's voice laughing, Robert's voice detailing their timeline, the app logs, the ignition schematics, the code in Alicia's phone. It was overwhelming in its completeness. The defense tried to argue intent versus action. They said it had all been theoretical, a bad joke, a misunderstanding between stressed spouses caring for a difficult elder. They painted me as paranoid, unstable, maybe even delusional, until Evelyn took the stand. She presented everything with surgical calm. She dismantled their arguments with precision, with dates, timestamps, expert testimony from a handwriting analyst, and 2 ATF investigators. The jury watched the recordings. The gasps were audible. On the 4th day, Robert asked to speak. He stood, face drawn, eyes wet, and looked toward the jury, then me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "It was Alicia's idea. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't think she'd actually do it." He turned to me. "Mom, please. You know I wouldn't really hurt you. You know me. Please. Say something. Please." I did not respond. Not then. Not yet. On the final day, just before closing arguments, the judge asked if I wanted to speak. I stood. My knees ached, but my spine did not bend. I walked to the witness stand slowly, deliberately. The courtroom fell completely silent. I looked at the jury, then at my son, then at Alicia, and I said, "You should have ensured your dignity first. It was worth more than the car you burned for." I turned, and I walked back to my seat. The courtroom stayed silent for a beat longer than normal. Then the judge nodded. The trial continued. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They came back with unanimous verdicts. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. The judge denied bail. Robert and Alicia were led out of the courtroom in shackles, their future burning down the way they had hoped mine would. I left the courthouse quietly. No reporters, no cameras. Just Evelyn beside me, her hand lightly on my elbow. "You didn't have to speak," she said. "I did," I replied. I needed to remind them what they'd tried to erase. She nodded, and we walked into the Louisiana sun, brighter, somehow, than it had been in months. I live in a small apartment now, tucked away near the Mississippi River, where the wind smells faintly of wet earth and river salt. It is not grand, but it is mine. There is a single bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a window that lets in the soft golden light of early mornings. I rise before the sun most days, just as I used to. I boil water in a worn steel kettle, spoon out exactly 1½ teaspoons of black tea, and wait for the steep. No rush, no voices, no footsteps behind me pretending kindness, just peace. The first sip always burns, just a little. It reminds me I am still here. No more whispered insults passed behind cracked doors. No more icy plates left alone on cold countertops. No more pretending not to hear the weight of contempt. Now it is only me. And the quiet. I write. In a leather-bound journal Evelyn gave me, I write down what I remember. Not just of the fire they tried to light, but the years before. My husband's laugh. The scent of gardenias in the spring. The soft weight of Robert as a baby, asleep on my chest. I write it all. Because I refuse to let the story end with flames. Every Sunday, I send Evelyn a letter, short, always handwritten. I tell her what the birds are doing, what the river looked like at dusk. I tell her I'm learning to bake again, that I found a new favorite book. She always writes back, sometimes with case updates, sometimes just to share a memory from our youth. I do not go near SUVs anymore. I walk everywhere. I take the bus. Sometimes I just sit by the river and watch tugboats churn slowly past, dragging their weight across water the color of dusk. I do not see Robert. I do not answer when his lawyers write or when distant relatives call just to check in. Their voices are full of questions they never asked when I needed them. I owe no one anything now, but I owe myself honesty. So I hung a sign beside my door, small, wooden, hand-carved by a local vendor down by the docks. I told him exactly what I wanted it to say. He looked at me sideways when I recited it, but he didn't ask why. He just nodded and said, "That's powerful." It hangs just below the doorbell. Plain letters, no fancy scrawl. It says, "I didn't die in that SUV, but the lie they built did." Sometimes people stop and read it. Sometimes they ask if it's from a book. I just smile and say, "Not yet." And then I close the door, quietly, peacefully, and alive. Thank you for staying with me through the end of my story. It was not easy to tell. There are some betrayals so quiet, so slow, so planned, that you almost miss them while they happen, until you're standing in the ashes of what they tried to do, holding proof that your life was never theirs to write off. I lived through it. I lived through the kind of silence that could have killed me if I had not decided to listen to my own voice again. And if you're watching this, I want you to remember something very simple, very true. Your story is not over just because someone else says it should be. Sometimes, the people you raised, the ones you fed, protected, sacrificed for, are the very ones who try to erase you. But silence is not surrender, and survival is not weakness. It is power, it is memory, it is justice that walks slowly but never forgets. So, if you're still here, if this story touched you, if it reminded you of something buried deep or made you sit a little straighter in your chair, then I ask you to do one thing. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because this is where the quiet women finally speak. This is where our memories aren't dismissed as too much or too old or too sad. This is where our truth, raw, complex, often painful, is honored. You'll find more stories here. Stories of grandmothers and mothers, wives and sisters, women who were overlooked, underestimated, and silenced until they chose to speak. These aren't fairy tales. These are real moments from real lives, shared so that no woman has to feel invisible ever again. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a caregiver, maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's you. Because in this world, there's too much noise and not enough listening. And when a grandma finally speaks, you'll want to hear every word. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing that our stories still matter. We're not done yet, not by a long shot.